All right, ladies and gentlemen. So our second review screencast is going to focus on the topic of immigration. So what we're going to do is very similar to what we did with the first screencast, the first review screencast. We're going to take you through a topic. There's going to be, similar to class, table of contents, and then some questions that you want to think about for each. So for colonial immigration, you want to think about who were they, why did they come to America, where did they settle, and what was their impact. So as far as colonial immigration, this is something that most people don't think of. So again, remember time periods. Colonial immigration, we're talking about 1492 all the way up until the foundation of the country, 1776. So we're not really going to focus too much on it, but the first thing you want to remember is that there's different European powers involved here. You have the Spanish, who are colonizing South America, Central America, and what becomes the southwest of our country. You have the French, who are colonizing what's Middle America and Canada. And then you have the British, who are colonizing the East Coast and then also parts of Canada. So there's different European powers that are fighting for colonial dominance here. And they're each taking on different groups of people coming to their country, or coming to their new colonies in the New World. Now, a distinction that you want to be able to make is between a settler and an immigrant. So when you look at this, settlers are the people who settle the colonies and settle these different places. So the Spanish have settlers, the French have settlers, and the English have settlers. Now when you compare, first thing you have to be able to do is to compare the French, the Spanish, and the English in this early colonial time period. This is really the 1492 to kind of like 1607 to maybe late 1600s comparison. The big difference here is that the Spanish and the French primarily only have their own people who are coming to settle these different territories. The Spanish really only have Spanish people coming. The French really only have French. The British are different. The British are going to have settlers, and they're also going to have immigrants coming from different parts of European society. So a settler is somebody who founds the colony. An immigrant is somebody who comes to an already established colony. So a lot of the early British people that are coming to British North America are settlers, like William Penn, the Puritans. These are settlers. Later groups that come in are immigrants. So the first big group of kind of a mix of settlers and immigrants is as a part of a wave of immigration that comes to the British colonies known as the Great Puritan Migration. So the foundation of Plymouth, the foundation of Massachusetts Bay, these are settlers who are founding colonies. But later on in the later 1600s, you also have more Puritans who are coming to the New World, and these are immigrants. And they're coming for a variety of different reasons. They're facing religious persecution. They might want economic advantages. Primarily for the Puritans, they're coming to try and establish what they deem to be their utopia, their utopian version of the Protestant church here in America. Now, later on, you're going to have other settlers who are, or excuse me, other immigrants who are coming to the New World. And for the British, you're going to have a lot of these new immigrants. When you look about where they settle, and this is important characteristic to understand about colonial immigration to the British colonies. They're going to settle in kind of this backcountry area. Two geographic locations you want to be aware of would be the Appalachian Mountains, which run up the coast, or not the coast, which run up kind of inland on the eastern seaboard right here. You can see it here on this map. It's kind of where the Appalachian Mountains run. So they run all the way from Georgia all the way up through New York and Pennsylvania. And another term is the Shenandoah Valley. The Shenandoah Valley is right next to the Appalachian Mountains. So the first characteristic you want to understand about colonial immigrants is that colonial immigrants are going to the backcountry part of the British colonies. They're not moving to cities. They're not working in industrial jobs. They're not working in factories. These are rural, poor immigrants. And they come to America primarily because they know that America is offering opportunity in land that is not offered in European society. So one of your big immigrant groups of the era, of the colonial age, are the Scotch Scotch-Irish immigrants, also known as the Scotch-Irish immigrants. And they're moving to this backcountry area. Some of them are coming as indentured servants. Some are coming and trying to purchase their own land, but they're primarily ending up in that backcountry part of American society. And that's important, an important distinction of colonial immigrants to understand. When we think of immigrants, we mostly think of the later generations of immigrants who are coming to factories, who are coming to colonial parts, or the more established northeastern cities of the early 1800s and late 1800s. That's not true of colonial immigrants. They're rural immigrants. They're coming from northern and western Europe. Primarily, most of them are coming from the British Isles. So you have the Scottish, the Irish, the British are your big immigrant groups of the age. And they're basically not what we think of as a stereotypical immigrant. Now, for their life and what they encounter, remember they're dealing with very harsh conditions out there in the backcountry. They're fighting with the Native Americans in a very tumultuous situation. And so you see a big divide develop throughout the colonies in the western-eastern division within the colonial world. You always learn when you're younger about the New England colonies, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies. What they don't discuss is that within basically all of the colonies, the eastern and western societies, they call the eastern people the coastal settlers, and then you have the backcountry settlers in the west. There's a very different culture. There's a very different economic situation. The western people are mostly fur traders. They're not really developing cash crop economies. And it's different people. You have immigrants, mostly in the backcountry, and you have more established English people living, towards the coast. All right, so we go into another era of American history, and we go into the next big wave of immigrants. We refer to these immigrants as the old immigrants. Now, that's a historical term, so don't get confused. It's not the oldest immigrants coming to America. There's the colonial immigrants, then you have the old immigrants, or the immigrants coming to America between 1820 and 1860. And these immigrants have certain characteristics again. So what you want to keep in mind, the two big groups that are coming in this wave of immigration are the Germans and the Irish. So the first thing that we're going to discuss is why they're coming. And primarily we're going to focus on the Irish because the Irish, this version of the Irish people who are coming are different than earlier colonial immigrants. So the reason that they're coming for the most part is that in the mid-1840s, they're going to have an awful potato famine that strikes Ireland. A blight strikes the potato and turns it black on the inside, a horrible disease. And people are literally starving to death. And so you can see that in this memorial to the survivors of the Irish potato famine. So 1 million Irish die, and another million are going to emigrate to the United States, mostly. So you have kind of this refugee population showing up in the United States. And when we look at where they're coming to the U.S. because the U.S., they think, is going to offer them jobs. America is going through its first wave of the Industrial Revolution. So you have, if you remember, factory owners like Lowell up in Massachusetts are kind of going through the first wave of the Industrial Revolution, and they need labor. And so the Irish are going to come here and basically look for jobs, look to supply labor to the United States. So when you look at the Germans and you look at the Irish, characteristics that you want to keep in that are important. Again, it's Northern and Western Europeans coming to America. Second thing is that they're going to move to cities and they're coming for jobs. So they're going to work in northern industrial cities. The colonial immigrants went to the backcountry. They're looking for land. They're looking for property. They're going to be coming to cities to look for work. Kind of what we think of when we think of immigrants. The last important characteristic is that the Irish, not really the Germans, but the Irish are your first predominantly Catholic immigrant group, which is going to cause some friction in American society. So where do they develop within the cities? They're going to develop into these, what will be considered really slum neighborhoods. There's very little regulation by the cities on how these places develop. So what you're looking at here is a picture of the 5 Points neighborhood, which is in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, or was in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and a notorious neighborhood. So they're overpopulated, they're not regulated by the government, and they become kind of dens of crime and violence, and just really some of the worst neighborhoods to develop in American history. And like I said before, they get this stereotype that they start to stereotype, Americans start to stereotype, especially the Irish, as uh, being unfit for American society. They start to stereotype them for their religion. They don't like their religious views. And so you really start to see the growth of nativism within America. And it becomes politicized with the political party known as the Know Nothing Party. And their ideology was that they wanted only 100% Americans, and what they meant by that was white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And the Irish didn't fit in their ideas and their ideology. And you're going to see this later again with later immigrant groups, kind of a nativist backlash to these immigrant groups that are coming in. And that's an important dynamic to understand. For each immigrant group, you're also going to have Americans who kind of see them as a threat. Either they're a threat economically, competing for jobs, they don't like their religious ideologies, they don't like their political influence. And you're going to see that throughout American history. It's not something that's just new or new to our time period. All right, the next big group that you're going to see coming in is known as the new immigrants. So the new immigrants are predominantly still coming from Europe, but they're coming from a different part of Europe. So the new immigrants are predominantly coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. And they're coming for similar reasons to the old immigrants. They're coming for economic opportunity for the most part. So your big groups within the Southern and Eastern European umbrella are going to be the Italians coming from Southern Europe and Eastern European Jews. So first we're going to talk about the Italians. Within Italy itself, the Italians are mostly coming from Southern Italy. And in Italy, they would say they're coming from south of the Mezzogiorno line, which is kind of the division within Italy. And southern Italy is very poor at the time. They're experiencing, again, agricultural problems, some famines. And so you start to see mass amounts of people leaving Italy to come to the New World. Now, Italians went to North America, they went to the United States, but a lot of them also went to South America. Another favorite spot of emigration was Argentina. So you see Italians coming mostly for economic opportunities. Eastern European Jews also come for economic opportunities, but they're also going to come because they're facing heavy religious persecution and discrimination in Eastern European society. So there's very prevalent anti-Semitism throughout Eastern European society, and in places like Russia, they're going to experience these things called pogroms, which are really kind of government-sanctioned murders of Jewish people in their communities and in their towns, and they were kind of just, the government would kind of like look the other way while these mass killings took place. And so for a lot of European Jews, Eastern European Jews, they felt like this was the time to leave. So you have a huge immigration throughout the late 1800s, early 1900s, about 5 million or so Jews are going to leave Eastern European society. So it's a massive push to kind of leave Eastern Europe. So when they come to America, they're again going to kind of stick in their ethnic enclaves. And this is when you kind of see like Little Italies develop. Here you're looking at a famous photograph of Little Italy in New York City, areas like Mott Street and Canal Street down on the Lower East Side. So you have massive amounts of immigrants coming, and they're really kind of developing into these ethnic neighborhoods. And the same is true of the Jewish immigrants that are coming from Eastern European society. So in class we discussed this whole idea of the melting pot versus the salad bowl, and are immigrants still molding and mixing into American society? And you start to see a little bit of this during the early 1900s. Now, again, you're going to experience the growth of nativism in reaction to this huge wave of immigration. This is America's biggest wave of immigration up until that point. And so nativism is going to take on a little bit different look in the early 1900s. It's not going to be so much a political party, as in the Know Nothing Party, but what you're going to see is the growth of some traditional racist organizations are going to kind of widen their umbrella to encompass this idea of nativism. So you're going to see the second growth of the KKK. The KKK is a Reconstruction organization from paramilitary organization from the South, and they originally are designed to keep African Americans from getting their rights and kind of inflict violence on African American communities in the South and resist the Northern attempt to reconstruct the South. But in the 19 teens and the 1920s, they're going to put a new face on, and they're going to widen their umbrella to encompass kind of anti-immigrant ideologies and anti-Catholicism. And what this does is it makes the Klan bigger and more powerful than it ever was. And you really see huge growth in the Midwest and the North. And you see growth in urban areas that you would never kind of expect. And so it's really taking up the banner of nativism, of anti-immigrant beliefs. And during this time period, what you start to see is nativism is moving from we don't like them because of their religion and their culture into the avenues of scientific racism and saying that the immigrants are genetically inferior to the native-born white Americans, and they don't want them to kind of dilute the genetic stock of America and kind of what has made America great up until this point. So they're going to take their kind of most stringent steps some of their most stringent steps in American history. They're going to pass these immigration quota laws of 1921 and 1924, which really limits the amount of immigrants that can come from particular countries. So what they do is they're pretty crafty in how they legislate this law. They use the 1890 census, and they take the 1890 census because there's not a lot of immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe in the country at the time. And what they do is they take the population of the country at the time from where people can kind of trace their heritage to in 1890. And then they say, okay, we'll take 3% of the 1890 population and we'll allow 3% to immigrate to America each year from now on. So in essence, what they did is they allowed for more immigrants from Northern and Western Europe and a lot less from Southern and Eastern Europe to come to the United States. Okay, the last group of immigrants that we're going to take a look at, we haven't actually taken a look at yet in class. This is post-1965 immigration. So a part of Johnson's Great Society and a part of the legislation that's passed in the late 1960s or mid-1960s to late 1960s is they changed the immigration laws. So they're going to change these immigration quota laws that really restrict immigrants coming to the United States. Now, one thing that we didn't talk about, we talked about the immigration quota laws, is all of the other immigrants that are coming to the that would like to come to the United States but were restricted by the quota laws. So if you look at 1890, what's the Mexican population in the country? What's the Central American, the South American population? What's the African and the Asian population? Really minuscule. And so what that does is it basically effectively bans these kinds of people from coming to America in that time period between 1924 and these new laws that are passed in 1965. Now, what the 1965 laws do is that it kind of opens up the rest of the world to immigration to the United States. And so you start to see more and more immigrants coming to America from non-European countries. So when you look at immigration from 1965 to the present day, the big difference is that you're going to see non-European groups coming in very large numbers to America. That's going to be our primary immigrant groups. They're going to be non-European for the first time. So that also kind of causes some tension. Just like when you had Catholics for the first time, you're going to have non-Europeans for the first time. Now, another big aspect of the immigration is kind of legal versus illegal immigration. So in this time period, you're going to see the growth of illegal immigrants coming to America in very large numbers, primarily coming from Mexico and from South America. So they've documented that there's about 12 to 14 million illegal immigrants in America. Now, in previous generations, before the quota laws and before the laws of 1965, it was kind of impossible to be an illegal immigrant. Really, the policy was if you could get to the United States, if you could pay your passage and you could come here, and you passed our inspections as far as health, you could stay. But those have changed since 1924 and then the new law of 1965. So what's happening is that people are illegally coming to the United States, which, as you guys know, paying attention to the 2016 election is a very divisive issue within the country. And it really plays a big role in immigration and talks about immigration today. Now, when you look at where immigrants post 1965 are living, it's not where you would traditionally associate with large centers of immigration. We tend to think of centers of immigration as being the Northeast, industrial cities of the Northeast and the Midwest, but they're mostly living in what's known as the Sun Belt region, which is the Southeast and the Southwest of our country. And when you think about that, it makes sense because uh, you know South America, a lot of South American and Central American countries, it's easy access to live, to kind of go across the border and to live in the Southwest or in the Southeast, and that's where you're going to see your predominant large amounts of immigrant population during the modern time period. And what you're seeing here is it's a big change for America demographically. So again, you have large Catholic immigrants coming in, but you also have a new group in American society, a large Hispanic population for the first time. And so, by 2010, Hispanics had eclipsed African Americans as the biggest minority group in the country. And so America's demographics are changing. We're becoming a different country and a much more diverse country. We're reflecting the world a lot more. For a long time, I mean, we were mostly had European immigrants and had a European population base. And so that's starting to change a little bit and starting to morph in the more modern time period. All right, so uh, that's going to kind of wrap it up for our discussion of immigration. So hopefully you've gotten something out of these two review screencasts. If you guys like them, if you think they're helpful, I'll keep doing them so that we can help ourselves to kind of get ready for the AP exam. So I'll see you guys on Monday. Hopefully you had a nice restful break.